They vanished on a bright afternoon. 2 little girls, gone without a trace. For 3 years, detectives chased nothing but rumors, until a hurricane ripped through the coast and uncovered a hidden room beneath an abandoned house. Inside, investigators found the truth no one was prepared to face. For 3 years, the Thompson case had been little more than a file collecting dust in the corner of an evidence room. Inside that file were photographs that no one liked to look at, transcripts of interviews that led nowhere, and a timeline of events that ended abruptly on a bright afternoon in 2019. 2 names sat at the top of the folder: Mia and Lily Thompson, age 5. Twins who vanished from their daycare playground without a single witness who could explain how. To the public, it was a tragedy. To the police, it was a mystery that refused to be solved. But to Jenna Thompson, it was something else entirely, a wound that never closed. The world had kept moving. Seasons had passed, elections had come and gone. The daycare had been repainted twice. But inside Jenna's apartment, time had stopped. The morning light spilled across the floor, touching the edges of half-assembled security gadgets spread across the carpet. Wires coiled like veins, sensors blinked faintly, and a half-open manual lay beside a cold cup of coffee. Jenna sat on the floor, screwdriver in hand, trying to install another motion detector above her window. It wasn't about safety anymore. It was ritual, the illusion of control. Every screw tightened, every light that blinked green, was a small rebellion against helplessness. Her fingers trembled slightly as she worked. The blue wire wouldn't fit. She tried again, forcing it into place until the copper strands bent out of shape. She let out a low breath, part sigh, part curse, and pressed her forehead against the cool wall. The quiet was heavy, the kind of silence that amplifies every heartbeat. She had grown used to it, to living with an emptiness that hummed beneath every sound. Across the room, a single photograph stood on the mantel. It showed 2 girls, identical in every way except for the light in their eyes. Mia, the thoughtful one, her smile careful and knowing. Lily, missing a front tooth, laughing so wide it seemed to fill the frame. They wore matching white sweaters with Angels 98 printed across their chests. The photograph had become more than memory, it was proof. Proof that they had existed. Proof that Jenna hadn't imagined a life that once had laughter in it. She reached out, her fingertips brushing the edge of the frame. 3 years. 3 years since that day in May when she got the call from the daycare. 3 years since the word missing became her entire vocabulary. The sound of wind rose outside her apartment window, a steady whistle that slipped through the narrow gaps in the old frame. It had rained for days, remnants of a distant tropical storm moving north from the Gulf. Jenna barely noticed anymore. Weather was background noise to grief. But that day, the air felt different, charged, as if the world was holding its breath. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She ignored it at first. Another spam call, another reminder to pay bills she could barely remember. Then she saw the name, Detective Miller. Her heart stopped for a beat, then raced. Miller never called. Not in the last 2 years. When the search had gone cold, his voice had disappeared from her life like everything else. She stared at the screen, afraid to answer and afraid not to. Detective Miller. Her voice came out a whisper. Jenna. His tone was careful, the same tone people use when stepping near the edge of something fragile. I know it's been a while. What happened? Her hand was already shaking. Did you find something? There was a pause on the other end, a measured breath. We might have a break. He hesitated, as if choosing his next words carefully. A hurricane hit near the Gulf Coast last week. A property owner was inspecting storm damage to one of his rentals, and he found something hidden, a space that shouldn't have been there. Jenna's pulse quickened. A space. Her voice cracked. We sent what we found for testing. He paused again. We got a preliminary DNA match. It's connected to your girls, Jenna. We need you to come down here. For a second, everything blurred. The walls, the blinking lights, the steady hum of the city beyond her window. A match, after 3 years. Hope and terror collided so sharply that she could hardly breathe. She didn't remember ending the call, only the sound of her keys hitting the table, the screwdriver clattering to the floor, and her heartbeat echoing in her ears. She called Mark, her husband, before she could think. He answered on the second ring, distracted, papers shuffling in the background. When he heard her voice, his tone changed instantly. "Jenna? What's wrong?" "They found something, Mark." Her words tumbled out, uneven, desperate. Miller called. "DNA. The girls. It's them." He went silent for a second. Then, quietly, "I'm coming. Don't drive yet. Wait for me." By the time he arrived, the rain had stopped. The city glistened under a silver-gray sky, every surface slick and reflective, like the world itself had been washed clean. They didn't speak much on the way down. The drive stretched across miles of empty highway, the tires humming against wet asphalt. Jenna watched the landscape change, from glass towers to fields, from motion to stillness. She tried to remember to breathe. Every mile brought memories she didn't want. The daycare's bright murals, the neighbor's soft smile, the day the girls were gone. She could still see the moment clearly, the daycare director's trembling hands, the way her own voice had fractured on the word missing. And that name, Carol Peterson, the neighbor across the street, the woman who had helped with groceries, who had baked muffins on Saturdays, who had offered to pick up the twins when Jenna got stuck in traffic. The same woman who never came back. Her house had emptied overnight. No trace, no forwarding address, just silence. For months, Jenna had lived across from that hollow shell, curtains drawn, mail piling up. Every morning she would stare at the darkened windows, as if waiting for them to blink. Now, as the car rolled south, the world outside grew wild again. Tangled woods, storm-fallen branches, signs of destruction left by the hurricane. Mark drove in silence, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Hope was dangerous. They both knew that. They'd learned to survive without it. But now, with every mile, it crept back in fragile, flickering, unwanted but unstoppable. They reached Panama City by late afternoon. The sky had a strange color, yellow and bruised purple, the kind of light that made everything look suspended between day and night. The air was heavy with salt and the faint scent of mold from buildings still drying out. Detective Miller was waiting near the edge of an old property, a small farmhouse swallowed by weeds and wind. A few police vehicles sat parked at odd angles, tires sunk into the mud. Miller looked older than Jenna remembered. The lines around his eyes were deeper, his hair more gray than brown. But the expression was the same, the look of a man who carried too many ghosts. He nodded as they stepped out. "Thank you for coming." "Where?" Jenna's voice trembled. "Where did you find it?" He gestured toward a small outbuilding at the edge of the lot, what looked like an old tool shed, its roof partially torn open by the storm. The owner noticed the wall had collapsed, he said. Behind it there was a sealed space, hidden from the inside. They walked through the mud together. Every step felt like walking into a dream that might turn nightmare. The air smelled of damp wood and rust. The ground was soft, the kind that swallowed footprints. Yellow tape flapped weakly in the wind. Inside the structure, flashlights moved, slow, deliberate arcs of light. Jenna stopped at the doorway. The interior was cluttered with broken furniture, rusted tools, and shadows. But her eyes went straight to the far wall, where a square opening gaped just above the floor, black and silent. For a long time, no one spoke. Finally, Miller said quietly, "That's where we found it. A small hidden room. There were traces, small things. We're still analyzing everything, but we know this much. Someone was here for a long time." Jenna's breath caught. She didn't ask the questions forming in her mind. Not yet. The words felt too heavy to say out loud. She stepped closer. The smell hit her first. Not decay, not horror, but something faintly familiar. A hint of dust and plastic and something sweet, like fruit snacks long forgotten. She stopped, gripping the doorframe. Miller touched her shoulder gently. "Please, you don't have to. I need to see," she said softly. She leaned forward just enough to peer inside. Her flashlight beam caught the edge of something, color against gray. A child's drawing taped to the wall. 2 stick figures. 2 girls. Holding hands. The light trembled in her grip. She stepped back, air leaving her lungs in a sound that wasn't quite a cry. Mark was beside her now, his arm around her shoulders, both of them staring into the darkness of that small space. The room that had waited 3 years to be found. Miller's voice broke the silence. "We don't have all the answers yet," he said. "But what we found here, it changes things." Jenna nodded faintly, unable to look away. Somewhere beyond that space, beyond the silence and the storm, was the truth. And for the first time in 3 years, the air didn't feel dead. It felt alive, electric, as if the world itself had shifted. That night, long after the police left and the wind quieted, Jenna sat alone outside the farmhouse. She watched the last light fade from the horizon. The earth was wet, the air thick with salt, but she felt something she hadn't in years. The smallest, most fragile spark of warmth beneath the weight of grief. Hope, not the wild kind that breaks you. The quiet kind that waits in the dark and whispers, "Not yet." The next morning began without color. A pale sky hung over the farmhouse, the air heavy with the smell of wet soil and diesel from the generators humming down the road. Detective Miller hadn't slept. Neither had Jenna. Mark sat on the porch steps, coffee cooling between his palms, watching the mist drift across the field where the storm had torn through. Every creak of the porch felt like the house breathing. Slow, reluctant, uncertain. Inside, Jenna stood at the window, staring toward the small outbuilding now sealed with yellow tape. It looked almost ordinary in the daylight, as if it could belong to any forgotten property. But she knew better. Ordinary things always carried the deepest scars. When Miller knocked, she didn't turn. She had heard his car before he reached the gate. The tired groan of the engine, the slam of the door, the soft crunch of his shoes on gravel. He stepped into the doorway and removed his hat. "Morning," he said quietly. She nodded without looking away. "Did you find anything else?" He hesitated. "We're still processing the site. The lab confirmed the DNA link to your family. But there's something else you might want to see." Her stomach tightened. He unfolded a photograph from a folder, one taken the night before, showing the same childlike drawing she had glimpsed through the darkness. Underneath it, faintly visible, were 2 other sketches, scribbles in red and blue crayon, overlapping like layers of thought. Jenna traced the edges with trembling fingers. "These are theirs," she whispered. Miller nodded. The paper was dry. It hadn't been there long before the storm hit. She looked up sharply. "What are you saying?" "That room might not have been abandoned as long as we thought." Later, as Mark drove her to the temporary command post, the tension in the car felt alive, like a third passenger. She tried to speak, stopped, tried again. What if they were here all this time? What if someone came back? Mark's hands tightened on the wheel. "Then we find them," he said, "and we bring them home." It was the first time he'd said home in months. The word sounded fragile, like something that might break if spoken too loudly. The sheriff's office was a storm of motion. Phones ringing, papers stacked in nervous towers, rain-streaked maps pinned to corkboards. Miller led them past the noise into a smaller room filled with photographs. Satellite images of the coastline, missing person posters, property records dating back decades. He pointed to a new one pinned near the center. A weather-worn photo ID, grainy and blurred. Carol Peterson. "This was recovered from the county archives," Miller explained. "Turns out she leased another property 2 towns over in 2021, under the same alias." Jenna felt her pulse in her throat. "Another house?" Miller nodded. "It's inland, untouched by the storm. We're getting a warrant now." The room fell quiet. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to pause. Then Jenna said, barely audible, "I want to go." Miller looked at her for a long moment. "You know what that means. It might not be easy." "I've lived with worse," she said. They left before noon. The drive inland carried them through miles of broken fences and leaning trees. Every small town they passed seemed frozen mid-breath. Gas stations boarded up, power lines drooping like exhausted arms. Miller's unmarked car hummed steadily over the highway, the sound of rain returning in soft bursts against the windshield. No one spoke. Each of them was lost in a different version of the same thought. What if the next door held the truth? The new property sat at the edge of a dried creek bed, surrounded by tall grass and oaks bent from years of storms. It was smaller than the farmhouse, painted a tired yellow, one shutter hanging loose. The lock on the door was old but clean, recently replaced. That single detail sent a shiver through Jenna's chest. Miller motioned for the team to wait as he approached. The deputy eased the door open. The hinges gave a long sigh. Inside, the air smelled of dust and something faintly floral, like perfume that had lingered too long on empty fabric. Sunlight sliced through half-closed blinds, drawing thin bars of light across the floor. In the corner stood a small table with a child's lunchbox resting on top. Bright pink, the kind sold in stores years ago. Jenna's knees weakened. Her voice trembled. "That's theirs." Miller moved closer, careful not to touch anything. The lunchbox had 2 stickers on it. One peeling rainbow, one faded star. Inside lay a single plastic bracelet, tiny and pink, with a missing bead. The room tilted slightly in Jenna's vision. Her breath came in shallow bursts. Mark steadied her shoulder. "It's them," she whispered. "They were here." That evening, the search expanded. Officers combed the property line, marking every footprint, every trace of movement in the mud. By nightfall, they had found a trail, small prints leading into the woods, half erased by rain. And beside them, something stranger. Tire marks from a small vehicle, sharp and deliberate, pointing toward the old county road. Miller crouched beside the tracks, flashlight cutting through the dark. "They're recent," he murmured. "Within a week." He turned to Jenna. "This isn't a cold case anymore." They stayed at a nearby motel that night, the kind of place built for passing truckers and forgotten travelers. Jenna sat awake long after Mark fell asleep. Rain tapped against the thin window pane, echoing like distant footsteps. On the small table beside her, she laid out the photograph of the drawings again. She traced the 2 stick figures over and over, until her vision blurred and the lines seemed to move. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine them alive. Not frozen in memory, not reduced to evidence tags, but breathing somewhere beyond reach. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Miller standing there, tired eyes and a folder in his hand. "I didn't want to wait till morning," he said. The lab called back. He placed a single photo on the table, an image captured from a highway security camera 2 towns north. A woman in a hooded jacket, walking with 2 children near a gas station. The photo was blurred by rain, faces barely visible. But even through distortion, the smaller shapes looked familiar, same height, same hair, same small tilt of the head. Jenna pressed her hand to her mouth. Tears filled her eyes but didn't fall. Her voice broke to a whisper. "Mia, Lily." Miller nodded. "It's not confirmed yet, but the timestamp is 5 days ago." 5 days. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was alive, trembling with disbelief and fragile hope. Outside, the wind shifted again, sweeping through the empty parking lot, bending the motel's flickering sign. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the trees, a night bird cried once and fell silent. For the first time in 3 years, the story had changed direction. The case that began with loss was moving toward light. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one truth settled deep in Jenna's chest. The storm that had broken everything open might also lead them home. Morning came gray and heavy. Mist clung to the trees around the yellow house, curling through broken fence lines like smoke. Detective Miller stood beside his car, phone pressed to his ear, listening to the lab director's report. When he hung up, he found Jenna waiting on the porch, arms crossed against the cold. Her eyes were raw from a night without sleep. "They confirmed it," he said quietly. "The footage was real. Those girls were alive 5 days ago." The words landed like fragile glass, beautiful and terrifying at once. By noon, the property swarmed with investigators. Drones buzzed overhead, deputies marked grids across the woods, Dogs moved through tall grass in wide circles. Every footstep raised damp earth and the faint scent of pine. Miller followed a narrow trail behind the house where the storm had exposed a patch of foundation. Brickwork that didn't match the rest. A false wall, sunken and brittle. When the crew pulled away the debris, a square door appeared, barely 3 feet high. The air that escaped was stale and cold, carrying the smell of dust, old cloth, and rain-soaked wood. Light from a single flashlight cut through the gloom. Inside was a cramped cellar lined with shelves. Not toys this time, records. Stacks of notebooks, weathered photo albums, labeled containers filled with dates and initials. Jenna stepped forward despite Miller's protest. She brushed her fingers across one of the notebooks. Inside, careful handwriting filled every page. Daily notes, lessons, meals, sketches. Each entry signed CP, Carol Peterson. But what stopped Jenna was the handwriting that followed on later pages. Different letters, rounded, uncertain, written in a child's hand. Mia learned a new song today. Lily painted the window blue so the sun could come in. Jenna's knees weakened. She pressed the notebook to her chest as if it were a heartbeat. That evening, Miller drove into town to retrieve old records. The sheriff's archives revealed something strange. Carol Peterson wasn't a name that began in 2019. It existed on paper 20 years earlier in a case from another state. A foster care worker accused of falsifying adoption files, later released, never charged. He stared at the faded mugshot. The eyes were older, but the shape of the face was unmistakable. A woman who had tried to build her own family out of stolen pieces of other people's lives. A second storm rolled in that night. Harder rain, wind tearing through the trees. Miller and his team secured the site, but Jenna refused to leave. She sat inside the farmhouse, the notebook open on her lap, pages fluttering under the draft that slipped through the boards. Mark paced near the window, helpless. "Jenna, you need rest." She shook her head. They were writing. They were learning. She kept them alive for years, Mark. Her voice trembled. "I can feel it." She didn't kill them. She wanted them. Miller entered, coat soaked from the rain. "We traced the vehicle from the camera. It was reported abandoned 2 nights ago outside Crestline County. We're sending units now." Jenna rose slowly. "Then I'm going too." Miller hesitated, then nodded. He knew better than to argue with a mother who had already buried fear 3 years deep. The convoy drove through sheets of rain, wipers fighting to clear the windshield. Fields blurred into silver water, power lines humming above them. Jenna sat in the back seat, clutching the bracelet found in the lunchbox. When they reached the Crestline edge, the road narrowed into gravel. A single light flickered in the distance, a cabin half hidden behind pines. The deputy killed the engine. Everything went still except the rain. Miller spoke softly. "Jenna, stay here until we clear it." She nodded, but her fingers were already on the door handle. The officers approached, flashlights slicing through mist. The cabin door was unlocked. Inside, silence, the smell of damp wood, and the faint echo of a music box playing somewhere deeper within. Miller followed the sound into the back room. Curtain moved, and there, standing beside an old trunk, was a woman. Older, thinner, hair streaked with gray. Her hands lifted slowly in surrender. "It's over, Carol," he said. She looked at him, eyes hollow but calm. "They wanted to go home," she whispered. "I was just waiting for the right time." Behind her, 2 small figures stirred. Jenna's breath caught as the flashlight beam found them. 2 girls, blinking against the sudden light, clutching each other's hands. Alive. Hours blurred into minutes. Paramedics, blankets, questions, tears. None of it fully real. The rain softened to a drizzle as dawn crept over the trees. Miller stood outside the cabin, watching the horizon shift from gray to gold. He had seen too many endings that came with body bags and paperwork. This one, finally, was different. Inside the ambulance, Jenna sat between her daughters, their small fingers tangled in hers. They were older now, faces thinner, eyes cautious, but their warmth was the same. Lily leaned her head against her shoulder. Mia held the bracelet, turning it in the light. Jenna closed her eyes. For the first time in years, the silence inside her broke. Not with a scream, but with a breath of peace. Weeks later, when the headlines faded and reporters moved on, the farmhouse near the coast stood empty again. The tape was gone, the grass already reclaiming the ground. Only the wind remained, soft, carrying the scent of rain and salt. Detective Miller filed the final report and paused before closing the folder. He wrote one last line at the bottom. Some storms destroy, others reveal what was never meant to stay hidden. Back home, Jenna hung the twins' new drawings on her living room wall. No locks, no sensors, just color. Outside the window, sunlight caught the edges of the paper, and for a heartbeat the whole room seemed to breathe again. Grief can build walls thicker than any prison, but sometimes, the same storm that tears your world apart is the one that shows you the door back home. If stories like this remind you that hope can survive the darkest silence, subscribe for more true tales of faith, mercy, and the light that follows every storm. The sound of machines had become the new kind of quiet. Heart monitors. For pumps, the soft shuffle of nurses in rubber shoes. For the first time in 3 years, Jenna Thompson's world was filled not with the silence of absence, but with the living, fragile rhythm of healing. Mia and Lily lay in separate hospital beds, sunlight spilling gently across their faces. Their hair had grown long, their cheeks pale from years without sun. Yet when they slept, their breaths fell in the same pattern, twin heartbeats of the same soul. Jenna sat between them, her hand resting on each small blanket. She had thought this moment would feel like victory, but it didn't. It felt like awakening. Slow, painful, filled with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. Detective Miller stood outside the glass window of the recovery ward. He'd seen reunions before, but never one like this. Something about it felt sacred, as if the hospital room itself was holding its breath. Mark joined him, voice low. "They don't talk much yet," he said. "Doctors say it'll take time." Miller nodded. After what they lived through, time is mercy. He looked back at Jenna. She hadn't moved in hours. Every second she watched her daughters, she seemed to be relearning how to exist in a world that had color again. Days turned into weeks. News crews camped outside. Headlines screamed miracles. Neighbors left flowers on the porch of the old apartment Jenna had abandoned years ago. But inside the hospital, the world moved quietly, measured by slow smiles, whispered prayers. The first words Mia spoke one morning when sunlight touched her pillow. "Mom," just that one word. Soft, uncertain, but real. Jenna froze, tears spilling before she could answer. She had prayed to hear that voice again, dreamed of it, begged heaven for one more chance. Now it was here, trembling in the air like a promise kept. When the therapists began their sessions, Jenna sat nearby, notebook open. She wanted to understand what they had endured, what they remembered, what they had forgotten. But the stories came slowly. Fragmented drawings, short phrases, nightmares that started in whispers and ended in silence. Lily spoke of the quiet room, where they were told to pretend the world outside was sick. Mia described how the woman they called New Mommy would read to them, sing lullabies, and forbid them from saying their real names. Jenna realized then that recovery wasn't about the day they were found. It was about everything that came after. She learned patience. She learned that healing had its own language, one written in pauses and small, hesitant smiles. One evening, Miller returned with his final report. He looked tired, but lighter somehow. "We found old letters in Carol's trunk," he said. "Turns out she lost a child years before she ever met you. She built her own world to replace the one she lost." Jenna listened silently. She felt no hatred, only sorrow. Sorrow for a woman broken by grief who tried to steal what she could not have. "She called them angels," Miller added softly. "Every entry, my angels." Jenna closed her eyes. "She wasn't wrong," she whispered. "They are angels, but they were never hers." 3 months later, the Thompson family returned home. Their old apartment looked smaller, yet warmer. The security devices, the wires, the locked windows, all gone. Jenna had taken them down herself. The walls were repainted pale blue. Children's laughter echoed through the hallway again, unsure at first, then stronger. Mia hung her drawings on the fridge. Lily watered the small garden box on the balcony. The world had begun to breathe again. At night, when the girls were asleep, Jenna sat by their door and listened. Not out of fear, but gratitude. The silence she once dreaded had become a friend, filled with peace instead of pain. Miller came one last time, file in hand, tie loosened, the lines of worry finally easing from his face. He stood in the doorway as Jenna poured coffee. "You ever think about leaving the city?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Every day. But for now, I just want to watch them grow." He nodded, setting the folder down. "This was the hardest case I ever closed," he said. "Not because of the work, because of what it reminded me. That sometimes, even when the world fails, faith doesn't." Jenna's eyes glistened. "Thank you, detective." He tipped his hat, smiled, and left quietly, the sound of his footsteps fading into the hum of city life. That night, Jenna took the twins to the shore, the same coast where the hurricane had once torn everything apart. The sea was calm now, gentle waves tracing silver lines across the sand. They stood together barefoot, the wind tugging at their hair. Mia looked up. "Mommy, is the bad lady gone?" Jenna knelt, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "Yes, baby. She's gone. And the storm that brought her took her away." Lily squinted toward the horizon. "But the storm also brought us back." Jenna smiled. "Yes," she whispered. "It did." She took their hands and whispered a quiet prayer. Not for answers, but for peace. The ocean breathed with them, steady and alive. We often pray for calm seas, but sometimes it's the storm that brings us home. For 3 years, one mother's world was nothing but silence. Yet within that silence, faith waited, patient, unbroken, because the hardest part of any miracle is believing it's still possible. If stories like this remind you that light can return after even the longest night, make sure to subscribe for more true stories of loss, mercy, and the hope that never dies. The seasons had turned quietly. Leaves, once burned by the hurricane's salt wind, grew green again. The streets near the Thompsons' apartment were filled with the sounds Jenna had once thought she would never hear again. The laughter of children, the soft rhythm of footsteps coming home from school, the distant bark of a dog at dusk. The world had gone back to ordinary things. But for Jenna, ordinary had become sacred. Every sunrise felt like a small ceremony. Jenna woke before the girls did, sitting at the edge of their shared bed. Mia slept curled toward the wall. Lily sprawled like a cat, arms wide, claiming every bit of morning light. The soft breathing of her daughters was the hymn she had prayed for. Some days, she still caught herself checking the locks, listening for footsteps that weren't there. But fear had lost its voice. It no longer owned her. She had learned that peace didn't mean forgetting. It meant remembering without breaking. The day of their return to school arrived with trembling hearts. Reporters waited outside, though cameras stayed respectful. Jenna walked the twins up the same sidewalk they had once walked together 3 years ago. The same brick path, the same painted fence, the same mural of smiling children on the wall. But everything looked different now. Because this time, she wasn't watching them disappear through the doors. She was walking them inside. The principal met them at the entrance, tears bright in her eyes. "Welcome home, girls." The twins smiled shyly. Mia carried a new backpack covered in stickers. Lily clutched a small shell she'd found by the sea. As they walked into their classroom, the other children fell silent for a moment. Not out of fear, but awe. Then someone clapped, and slowly, the room filled with applause. A quiet kind, the kind that says we remember, and we're glad you're back. Detective Miller arrived later that week. He brought no files, no reports, only a box wrapped in brown paper. "It was in evidence," he said. "Thought you might want it." Inside the box lay the old photograph. Mia and Lily at daycare, hands outstretched, smiles bright. The same photo that once lived on her mantle like a wound. Now Jenna framed it again, placing it beside a new picture, one taken just yesterday. The same girls, older, their smile smaller but deeper. The two photos stood side by side, before and after. Between them, the distance of 3 years. And between them, mercy. One night, Jenna began writing. Not about fear. Not about the investigation. But about what it means to wait in the dark. She called it When the Light Returned. Each chapter began with a prayer and ended with a memory. It wasn't meant for the world, it was meant for her daughters. For the day they would grow old enough to ask what happened, and why. She wanted them to know that their story wasn't just about what was taken from them, but about what they reclaimed, faith, trust, and the quiet courage to begin again. Months later, the town held a small gathering. Not a celebration, not exactly, but a remembrance. They called it the Day of Return. Families who had once lived in fear came together to honor resilience, to thank the rescue teams, to plant trees for the children who never came home. Jenna stood on the stage beside Detective Miller, sunlight soft on her shoulders. Her daughters released 2 white balloons into the sky, one for the past, one for the future. They rose, drifting until they vanished into the blue. When the applause ended, Miller leaned close. "You kept faith when everyone else lost it," he said quietly. Jenna smiled faintly. "No," she replied. "Faith kept me." That night, the city slept under a blanket of rain, gentle, rhythmic, almost musical. Jenna stood by the window, watching droplets race down the glass. Behind her, the girls whispered in their beds, half dreaming, half laughing. The clock ticked softly. A streetlight outside flickered once, then glowed steady again. She thought of all the nights she had begged for a miracle, not knowing that miracles seldom come as thunder or lightning. They come as a knock on the door, a call that breaks the silence, a child's voice whispering "Mommy" after years of absence. She turned off the lamp. The room filled with the kind of quiet that no longer hurt. And in that quiet, she smiled, because the light had returned, not from the sky, but from the hearts that had survived the storm. When the light returns, it doesn't erase the darkness. It proves we were strong enough to stand through it. For Jenna, hope was never the absence of fear. It was the decision to believe anyway. Because sometimes, miracles don't begin with angels. They begin with storms. If the story moved you, subscribe for more true stories of resilience, of faith that outlives the silence, and of the human spirit that still believes, even when the world forgets.